Hi everyone, Jim Perkins here, one of your hosts for the AMI meeting coming up in a couple of days. I'm here in downtown Rochester, and I thought I would tell you a little history of the area and show you some of the sites that are just an easy walk from the hotel and the convention center. Speaking of which, I'm standing in front of the Rochester Riverside Convention Center right now on Main Street. And if I turn just a little bit, the tall white building behind me is the Hyatt Regency Hotel, the main hotel for the meeting. And if you look just over my shoulder, kind of behind that little tree back there, you can see the skywalk that connects the Hyatt Hotel to the convention center. I'm on the other side of the convention center now. This would be the west side of the convention center. And you probably guessed that the Riverside Convention Center is next to a river. This is the Genesee River. It starts in western Pennsylvania, about 150 miles from here, flows northward across New York State, passing through the Letchworth Gorge. And by the way, that's a great place to make a day trip, Letchworth State Park. It's about an hour south of Rochester, so you'd need a car, but a wonderful place to visit. The Genesee River, after passing through Letchworth Gorge, continues up here into the city of Rochester, passing right through the heart of downtown, and eventually emptying into Lake Ontario a couple miles north of here. If you walk 2 blocks south from the hotel or the convention center, you'll pass by this building. This is the Rundell Memorial Library, Rochester's main public library. You can still see the Hyatt Hotel over there in the distance, and the low gray building is the convention center. And you'll eventually come to Court Street, and there's a bridge across the river, which I'll show you in a minute. That red brick building is Dinosaur Barbecue, a popular restaurant built in an old railroad depot. Just to the right of Dinosaur Barbecue is the entrance to the Genesee Riverway. This is a network of pedestrian and bike trails that run up and down both sides of the river. And again, here's the Genesee River. And we'll walk down the trail, the Genesee Riverway Trail, just a short distance. If you're interested in a nice walk or a morning run, you can access the Riverway Trail here and walk or run all the way down the east side of the Genesee River. And eventually you'll come to the Ford Street Bridge, not the arch bridge in front of us, but about a mile away is the Ford Street Bridge. You could cross over Ford Street and then come up the west side of the river. And there's another entrance to the Riverway Trail on the other side of the Court Street Bridge right here. If you're a little more adventurous and you want a longer walk or a longer run, you can continue down the east side of the river, past the Ford Street Bridge, all the way down to the University of Rochester campus. They have 2 pedestrian footbridges that cross over the river. And again, you could come back up the Riverway on the other side, all the way back up here to Court Street again. That would be a 4 or 5 mile loop, depending on which of those pedestrian bridges you crossed. You can also access the Genesee Riverway from this little side street behind me called Bragdon Place. This is about 1 block north of the convention center off of St. Paul Street. That brings you to this little plaza with an interesting sculpture. And behind me is the Sister Cities Bridge, another pedestrian footbridge that crosses the river. That's where all the flags are. We'll go out there in just a second. So there's actually a fence here across the entrance to the Sister Cities Bridge, but it's not locked. So let's go out on the bridge a little bit, and looking south down the river, this would be in the direction of the convention center and the hotel. And then looking north along the riverway. At the other end of the Sister Cities Bridge is a beautiful new park called the Genesee Crossroads Park, which would be another great place for a walk or maybe a run. Let's do a little panorama from the Sister Cities Bridge. That's Main Street right in front of us, the Rochester Riverside Convention Center. I walked north just a block to Bragdon Place, that little side street where the orange sculpture is, and crossed through the fence right there at the other end of the bridge. Now continuing around and facing north up the river. Off to my left is another one of Rochester's famous sites, the headquarters of the Eastman Kodak Company. Eastman Kodak was founded here in Rochester by George Eastman in the 1850s. And it's not nearly as big a company as it used to be. They kind of dropped the ball as far as film and digital photography was concerned. But they're still active, they're still in business, and still one of Rochester's larger employers. The original inhabitants of this area were the Onondaga people, also known as the Seneca Nation. They were part of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, what many of us learned in school as the Iroquois Confederacy. And they had a number of villages built along the shores of the Genesee River. European settlers were also attracted to this area, starting in the late 1700s, shortly after the American Revolution. Now, it wasn't just the river that attracted them to this area. It was these, the waterfalls or cataracts. There are actually 3 different sets of waterfalls within the city limits of Rochester along the Genesee River. This is the High Falls or Upper Falls. This would be closest to the convention center and the hotel, about a 10 to 15 minute walk along St. Paul Street, north of the convention center. The European settlers built flour mills into the walls of the gorge using the river to power their mills. By the 1820s, Rochester had become the largest flour producer in the United States. So if we look around downstream again, there's the Kodak headquarters off in the distance again. And our next stop, the Genesee Brewery and Genesee Brew House, which is another great place to get views of the waterfall. It's time for lunch. Let's stop into the Genesee Brew House to grab a bite and grab a beer. I'm up on the rooftop deck of the Genesee Brew House. There's the Genesee Brewery. Kodak headquarters again. The Genesee River. And the best view in town of the High Falls. The thing that really put Rochester on the map was this structure, the Erie Canal. Completed in 1825, it starts at Lake Erie in Buffalo to our west, which is that way, and runs 350 miles east to the city of Albany, New York, that way, where it connects to the Hudson River, and freight could be transferred to boats on the Hudson and transported all the way down to New York City, with access to the Atlantic Ocean and to markets all the way around the world. This created a much cheaper and more convenient way of shipping Rochester's flour to markets in New York and to the world beyond. But more importantly, it opened up the entire Great Lakes area to international commerce. And in fact, it's one of the things that is responsible for New York being such an economic powerhouse that it is today. Right now I'm standing at Lock 32, located in the village of Pittsford, outside of Rochester, and we were lucky enough to just watch one of the local tour boats pass through. This would not be accessible from downtown Rochester, at least certainly not by foot. If you had a car, you could come out here to the suburbs. The reason I brought you down here was just to make an important point. This is not the original route of the canal. The Erie Canal, when it opened in 1825, originally passed right through the heart of downtown Rochester in order to access the flour mills. In the early 1900s, as more freight traffic was taken over by the railroads, the canal was actually closed through the city and was rerouted down here into the suburbs south of Rochester. When the Erie Canal was first completed in 1825, it passed right through the heart of downtown Rochester in order to access the flour mills. Now there was just one problem. Imagine the canal, which was flowing east-west, intersecting with the Genesee River flowing north-south. When the river is really flowing more strongly than it is today, the current would carry the packet boats, the barges from the canal, downstream right across the waterfall. So they needed to find a different way to have the canal pass through the city. So their solution was to build an aqueduct, and you're actually looking at it right in front of me. Now there was an original aqueduct that was built in 1823, right before the completion of the canal. This particular one was a replacement built in about 1840, and the original aqueduct was just the lower level of arches that you see on this bridge in front of me. Eventually, in about 1918 or 1919, the canal was relocated to a new location south of the city and no longer passed through the center of downtown, so the old aqueduct was abandoned. A new level was built on top of the old aqueduct to create the Broad Street Bridge. So the upper level that you see there is actually Broad Street passing over the old aqueduct. The lower level, the original aqueduct, was actually turned into a subway, and Rochester operated a subway system in downtown right up through the 1950s. The subway was eventually abandoned because of the increasing popularity of automobiles, but the tracks in the subway were still used for moving freight around downtown Rochester right up until 1997. And finally the freight traffic stopped and it was completely abandoned. There's a little plaza here at the west end of the Broad Street Bridge, the west end of the old aqueduct and subway. A little plaza right here behind Blue Cross Arena. And if we walk up a little ways, you can actually look into the old abandoned subway. This is the abandoned aqueduct and subway system. Maybe not the prettiest thing in the world, and I'm afraid it smells a little bit like a New York subway. Like a lot of abandoned things, it becomes a canvas for graffiti artists. So if you really enjoy graffiti, you might find this place interesting. They actually do tours down here periodically. If you walk a few blocks southeast from the Hyatt Hotel or the Convention Center, you'll pass Rochester's Manhattan Square Park, which is currently decorated for Rochester's Pride Day. Then continue a few more blocks past the park. Just past Manhattan Square Park is this building, the Strong National Museum of Play. 285,000 square feet of space devoted to the art of having fun. Not to be missed, especially if you have kids, but even if you're just young at heart. It includes the National Toy Hall of Fame, an exhibit of old video games and arcade games, and a butterfly conservatory. Here's the main entrance to the Strong Museum at Reedman Plaza. Right across from the Hampton Inn, where some of you may be staying. There's a small retail area over here that includes a couple of nice restaurants and bars like Nerdvana and the Fatty Beer Company. There's another view of the outside of the Strong Museum. Walk around here just a little bit. And that glass enclosed building is their butterfly conservatory. Right now I'm on East Avenue, a beautiful tree-lined street located southeast of the downtown area. And I'm standing in front of the George Eastman Museum. This was the mansion belonging to George Eastman, the founder of Eastman Kodak Company, and it's now been turned into a museum of photography. This is located about 1.5 miles from the Hyatt Hotel and the Convention Center, so a little bit longer walk, but definitely walkable and also a nice place to take a run. Just a little bit closer view of the George Eastman house and the surrounding East Avenue neighborhood. Looking forward to seeing you all in Rochester in a few days. Cheers!